Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending our Questline webinar on 2022 Email Marketing Best Practices and Trends. My name is Maureen Murky, and I'm the technical producer of today's webinar. Before we begin, we want to cover a few housekeeping items. To the left of your screen are multiple application widgets you can use. Most of the widgets are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most of your desktop space. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can submit them through the Q&A widget, which is directly below the presentation window. We will try to answer all questions during the webcast, but if a more in-depth answer is needed or we run out of time, they will be answered later via email. Some networks may cause slides to advance more slowly than others, so logging off of your VPN is recommended. If your slides do fall behind, pushing F5 on your keyboard will refresh the page. If you experience any other disruptions during the broadcast, please use the Q&A widget for any technical questions as well. We will be sending everyone a follow-up email within the next few days, which will include a PDF of the PowerPoint presentation and the playback link to the recording of today's webinar. We will also be conducting poll questions during the presentation and would greatly appreciate your participation. Please be aware that you are not the only participant today. The names of the other attendees are not being shown to you for privacy. Now let me introduce today's host. Mike Carter is a senior engineer for Questline. Mike has a bachelor's in engineering and an MBA degree from The Ohio State University. He is also a certified energy manager. At Questline, Mike writes articles for newsletters, answers Ask an Expert inquiries, and develops webinars on energy topics. And now I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mike, who will introduce our guests and get things started for us today.
Well, thank you, Maureen, and welcome to the last webinar in our Plugged In series for 2021. This month's topic is, of course, email marketing best practices and trends. As shown in our agenda, the webinar is going to begin by really taking a step back to review the strategic focuses of 2021, including things like personalization and segmentation and interactive emails. Then, our speakers will share their expectations for the top 10 trends of 2022 and offer some details on things like Apple's privacy changes. In between, you'll have a chance to answer some insightful poll questions. Now, we're going to share the answers with everyone, so be sure to participate. Finally, at the end, we'll open the floor for answering questions from our audience. Just find a widget to your left with the question mark icon, click on it, and submit your question at any time. But before we begin, let me introduce our two speakers. Bethany Farshone is Marketing Director at Questline, responsible for the company's brand promotion strategy. Bethany has over 10 years of experience with content creation, public relations, and digital marketing. In addition to energy utilities, she's worked with clients in transportation, consumer packaged goods, retail, and healthcare. Cynthia Price is Vice President of Marketing at Litmus. Her team drives and supports the Litmus and email community through content marketing, demand generation, and events. She's been in the email marketing industry for over 10 years and was previously Vice President of Marketing at Emma, an email service provider. She's passionate about creating authentic communications and harnessing the power of email, the heart of the marketing mix. I'm going to launch the first of 4 polls today. Question is, what is your utility's biggest struggle with email communications? You see, we have 4 specific answers. Has to do with resources or content, segmentation, or email lists. But if that isn't one of them, just click the other, and then we'll give you a chance in just a little while to give some specifics on that. So I appreciate you participating in our polls. Choose which of these 4 you would consider your utility's biggest struggle with email communication. See, a lot of you are jumping on that. Appreciate that. And I'm going to share the results here in just a second when I see that most people have answered. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's been shared thus far. And it looks like for most of you, it's segmentation. And then it's kind of scattered amongst internal resources and clean contact lists. Of course, these are all challenges. A couple of you, several of you said other, so I'm going to go ahead and now launch that poll, especially for those who said other. So if you said other, why don't you type in there what those might be, and then we'll just share those in here in just a second. So what would be the other that aren't on that list? I think several of you chose that. I'll give you a chance to share with that. Don't be bashful. Go ahead and just type in what you think is your biggest problem in email marketing. And looks like we have a couple of answers. One is just timeline, speed to market, and another one is click-through rates, which will be, of course, hopefully, and I know we will be addressing those. So with that, let's hear from our first speaker, Bethany Farshone. So Bethany, I want you to take control.
Hi, everyone. We're really happy to be here today and talking about all this. Before we can jump into 2022, let's take just a minute to talk about 2021. So listed here are trends that we've been speaking about all year long. These trends are not going to go away in 2022. We expect that they'll continue and will grow in importance. But we do see a handful of new trends being added. So that's what we'll talk about today. In general, though, for 2021, the biggest thing we saw was just a massive rise in digital adoption and digital communications. And so what's going to be the big thing as we look forward is how do we maintain that and grow that as we go into the next year. So we're going to have to continue improving digital communications and digital experiences, and this is particularly true for email. So let's dive into where we're going to go in 2022. Email's going to continue to be really, really important. A new study that came out from DMA Consumer Tracker this year said that 96% of consumers check their email every day, and over 70% of consumers believe that email is the best channel for company contact. So while email's been around forever, it's still really, really important within the customer communication mix. And when done right, it's actually a conversation with your customer. So it's really valuable and really powerful. And as I said just a second ago, we're just going to have to continue working on improving these as the year of 2022 continues.
All right, now I'm going to introduce the second poll for today. The question is, what are the primary goals of your email marketing strategy presently? It has to do with education, conversions, sales, or maybe it's just all about the customer, engagement with customer, satisfaction with the customer. What are the primary goals for email marketing strategy? Again, if that's your goal is not on the list, just click other and we'll give you a chance to input that as well. Again, don't forget, over on the left, we have the widget with the question mark icons. If you have any questions about what content's covered presently thus far, or just about email marketing in general, just type those in, and we'll be addressing those at the end here. Looks like quite a few of you have participated in this one. Getting still some people answering. What's the primary goals for email marketing strategy thus far? And looks like everyone's pretty much settled down, made their choices. Let me share that. Top one, by a little bit, as engagement and customer satisfaction. So it's all about the customer. Secondarily, getting those conversions. And then thirdly, maybe some education. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move forward here, and I'll hand it back over to Bethany, who's going to start us off with talking about some of those key trends for the new year. Bethany, take control.
Yeah, let's jump right into it. Let's start talking about these trends that we have listed here. We're going to dive into each of these, so don't worry, we'll get back to all of them. The first one, though, of creating an improved after-sales experience is something that's really exciting. Customer journeys are just more important than they've ever been before, especially in the space of utilities. McKinsey shared that customers actually are asking for and want an improved after-sales experience So maybe they're not all getting what they need after they make a purchase or sign up for service. For utilities, we think this is going to be really important for onboarding, after your program enrollment, and after marketplace sales. So for example, with onboarding, rather than just one communication, we recommend building 3 to 5 different touch points after a client is onboarded, and something that presents all the options that are available to them for things like payments, different communications, what programs are available to them, what resources are available to them. Make sure all of that is known up front. Customers are asking for more communications from the brands that they're engaging with. In fact, we found that within our data, when people get Welcome Series and they engage with those first few emails, they open future emails from the utility at a 30% higher rate. So setting that first step within the customer journey is really, really important. Another example would be from a marketplace purchase. So say someone buys a smart thermostat. Maybe they buy it, but they let it sit unused and they don't get the maximum benefit out of it. So making sure that you follow up with customers and have journeys for each interaction is essential. So how do they install that smart thermostat? Do they need any maintenance reminders? Do they need suggestions for next purchases? How can they make the most out of what that first step was? Customers are looking for that guidance. And now I'll pass it to Cynthia.
Thank you. So the next thing, I love that in that first poll, we heard that segmentation was one of your key challenges, because I really do think that at the core of any great segmentation strategy is really understanding and using your data effectively. So go to the next slide. You know, I think that when we started talking about this conversation with you all at utilities, the one thing I said was that, you know, you all have this great benefit, and sometimes it can be an overwhelming benefit in that customer marketing typically has access to so many data points that it can be somewhat overwhelming. So what we always recommend is, and end of year is a great time to do this, is to really audit and understand what data you have access to for your customer base, which data points are available to you in your CRM, which of those are ported over to your email marketing service provider, and which of those, you know, and what's your current state look like, and what would be your ideal state. And I think that, you know, the key here is that you don't have to start with everything. Start with the key data points that you think will allow you to build customer segments and dynamic campaigns that will really give you sort of a more effective experience. The other thing we recommend is to create a hierarchy of the data for better email. So, you know, if you know that location or, you know, product usage are data points that you'd like to integrate into your campaigns, figure out which of those you want to start using first, and, you know, start implementing those into your campaigns for, you know, a period of time, and then introduce the next layer, and then introduce the next layer. Sometimes, like I said, I would imagine that there is a lot of data in this audience that you all have to choose from, and sometimes it can be somewhat overwhelming.
Thank you. Data is super exciting, the things that you can do with it within email. It's one of the best uses of, or email is one of the best uses of data, in my opinion. Next, I want to talk about newsletters. So newsletters aren't new, but now's the time to go all out with newsletters. They've had a resurgence in popularity. I'm sure that you've noticed. Now publishers all have a plethora of like 50 different emails that you can choose from. They're really diving into going niche. So that might be a niche writer that people follow a particular person, or a niche topic where they have a very specific interest. So we recommend that utilities focus on creating specialty issues for different interests that their customers may have. And since newsletters are the foundation for ongoing customer engagement, if you're only sending them quarterly, we recommend that you consider thinking about sending them monthly. Customers really are accustomed to getting monthly newsletters. It's something that, when done right, they look forward to. And so newsletters have also typically focused on articles, but we're seeing a lot of experimentation with different types of content. So you can embed infographics in newsletters, you can include links to videos. Making sure that you have fun with newsletters is really exciting, and things that customers expect because of the other experiences they're having with these other publisher newsletters that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think newsletters are they're an amazing way for a brand to really build trust over time. We think about, our goals for newsletters are often less specific than our goals or than our goals for other campaigns that we're sending. And I think newsletters are just a great way to sort of build awareness and trust for a brand in general. I love it. The next thing that we always want to talk about, and I'm biased because this is sort of where Litmus's bread and butter here, but is to optimize for all platforms and preferences. There is overwhelming data to show that one bad experience in an email, whether that's a broken link, whether that's an image that doesn't render correctly, whether that is bad personalization that's wrong and off, it can really turn off a consumer or a customer to the brand at large. It can have sort of long-lasting negative effects. So there are over 100 different email clients, which means that there are over 100 different rendering options for every email that you're designing and sending to people, whether they're using Yahoo Mail on an Android phone or Gmail on their Apple phone or Outlook on their work computer. There are many, many different ways, and none of those guys speak the same language or have necessarily the same rules, which is frustrating, but understandable. And what we always recommend is that you just want to test for all of those different opportunities to make sure that everybody has the best shot at getting the message as you intended it to look and as you intended it to feel. The other thing is dark mode. Dark mode has become wildly popular over the past few years. There are some studies that show that over 80% of people who are using Apple devices are using dark mode. I think that number fluctuates up and down, but it's really, really important that if you're designing an email, you're checking for what it's going to look like with dark mode rendering. Here's a good example here of Apple Mail, Outlook, how an email renders in basic code, and then how it would render in dark mode, which I think is just a really important thing for you to just consider.
Absolutely, because if you're not, then things that you might have intended to show up in dark mode might show up as being unreadable, which, like you said, just ruins that experience. So it's really important to check those things. Also, interactive email is rising in popularity. So in an email sense, interactive can mean a few things. It's not necessarily just like surveys and calculators in the way that we talk about interactive two-way pieces of content in other formats. But for email, it also means adding just interest and movement and animation to your emails so that they stand out. Bold and bright colors were really popular in the last year for emails, and that's not going to change. People like excitement in their inbox. They're in their inbox every day. They need more visually exciting creative materials. So for an example, we have here a paperless billing campaign that went out for one of our clients, and you'll see that the header image has action in it. It's more eye-catching. And in a similar way, this is a email from actual Questline marketing this year. Just adding that extra element of design really goes a far way. And we know that interactive content can generate up to 5 times more views than static content because it does capture attention.
I just love those examples. I think that's so true. I mean, if you even look at your own behavior in your own inbox, you sort of can watch yourself getting more intrigued with those visual examples that show a little bit of movement or just something of interest for you to sort of latch onto. The next thing is sort of related, but more foundational on the design front, is just to ensure your emails are accessible. And that means, if you go to the next slide, that means that, not just that people of all abilities can engage with your email, which is increasingly important and absolutely the right thing to do. It also, when you focus on accessibility, it actually makes the emails more sort of pleasing and better engagement. You see better engagement from all audiences when you use sort of foundational accessibility techniques, which would be, you know, on the copywriting front. You want to write so everyone can understand. You want to keep your language as concise as you can. You want to limit jargon or difficult words. Just write like a human to human, and not try and catch yourself when you start to use industry specific language that the consumer might not be as interested in, frankly. On the design front, there are a whole load of accessibility techniques that you want to keep in mind, but some of the basics there are just to create a strong hierarchy of, you know, how the email looks. You want for someone to very easily be able, for the content to stack on top of each other, and for the most important things to be sort of at the top, and for it to work its way down, so that anyone who's reading it can get a real sense of the message that you're trying to send and what that experience looks like. Gone are the days of, you know, even though newsletters, and I fully agree, are making a massive resurgence, you don't see a ton of multi-column newsletters anymore. You don't see a ton of sort of sidebar action in an email. And that's because in an accessible environment, those have a really hard time with rendering. You also want to keep contrast high on the design front. You know, one of the and use white space to your advantage. You know, the white space and the contrast are key pieces of someone who might have vision impairment, or, you know, issues reading on any level. The contrast of the font you use, making sure that it's actually dark enough to sort of pop off the screen, making sure that if you're using copy on top of an image, that copy has a good enough color contrast with the image behind it, and that you're able, it just is, again, you know, something that is, it's obvious good design standards, but it's also the right thing to do from an accessibility standpoint. There are also a number of things in the code environment that you would want to do from an accessibility standpoint, one of which is just using semantic HTML. And all that means is that you're using the language in the actual code that describes what it is that's happening on the back end of the code. That when people are using accessible, friendly rendering devices, that helps them to understand what's happening more readily. The other is the alt text for images. You know, a lot of times if an image doesn't render, you'll see hilarious ways that people have tagged images in emails, which are just their own internal ways of describing what's happening in an image. But you really do want to make sure that you're adding alt text to your images, and that you're using the alt text to be describing what exactly is happening, and not just stock image number 4 or whatever it is that, you know, a lot of us would use with our internal language. On the example front, we've got a really good example of the email on the left is from 2019, and the email on the right is with a more accessible point of view. You can see that they're not drastically different. They're spread out in a way that allows someone to scan the email a little bit better. It breaks up the content in really, really interesting ways where you're able to see each section and what it is that each section is about, more so than in those bullets that are very, very close together. You know, I think there are a number of ways that, and we can send out, we have a whole guide to accessibility, which I think shows some other examples as well. But it's, you know, like I said, we find that when people focus on accessibility, it not only helps them, you know, broaden their content for larger audiences of all abilities, but it also tends to get better results just because they're more engaging from a design standpoint.
Absolutely. If you can't read the email, then the intentions are just not even there. So being able to separate content, like you were mentioning with newsletters, how they used to have the columns and that different look, and now actually all of the newsletters I subscribe to are moving towards the look of this 2021 example on the right, where there's modular sections that break apart for easy reading, easy scanning, easy understanding. Also within email, we are expecting user-generated content to become more popular. Customers want to see the success of other customers. So that's both business and residential. And from a residential standpoint, if you can include video testimonials or case studies of other CNI or small business customers that have participated in programs, that's a great way to get new customers involved. They can see firsthand what it was like for someone who's similar to them and talk through actual struggles that they might have seen and successes with energy efficiency that they achieved. In a similar way for residential, if you can include actual reviews within your email while they're already like on your website and available for viewing that way, putting them right within email is a great way to prompt more action and improve your click rates. So making sure that reviews are there for people to see and relate to is really important. And that's because consumers trust other consumers before they trust the brand. So while you might be saying the same exact thing within your messaging that customer is saying in their review or in their case study, consumers just in general will trust that message, and it'll feel more authentic if it comes from user-generated content. Millennials in particular say that their friends are their most credible source for information. So they want to hear from people who are just like them.
I fully agree on that one. I can say that from my own experience that there's something just very compelling about those 5-star visuals in any kind of marketing exercise, whether that's in social media or in email. We find that those are highly engaging, that people will definitely engage in those. And that's true across all industries, which is surprising to me. So it's not just about the sweater that you might want to purchase that you sort of are getting retargeted for. It's also true about, you know, B2B businesses and anything else. So I think that's a really, really good point. The other thing that we always talking about data, you know, you have the data that you have on your audience because they're consumers or because that data is in your CRM. This next layer is also critically important, which is what do they actually want from you? So you've got the data that you can use to segment based on, you know, who they are and what you know about them. But it's really, really important that you start to implement preference centers, which are basically asking them what do they want to hear from you. So you are not over emailing them, you're emailing them with the content they actually want to get from you. And you're, you know, actually able to identify who is more interested, you know, raising their hand for what it is they want. The benefits are obvious here. It's reducing unsubscribes. Because people are not getting inundated with campaigns or topics that they aren't interested in. It allows you to showcase all the different, you know, they might not know that you have a special newsletter for a certain segment. They might not know that you have a special stream of content on a certain topic. And it allows them to, you know, sort of pay attention to that and let you know which topics they're most interested in. You know, you can do preference centers in a number of different ways. You know, the key and most obvious ones are email lists. Which content do they want to get from you? Do they want to subscribe to your newsletter? What interests do they have? What timing? You can even ask them, how often do you want to hear from us? Do you only want to hear from us when we have transactional information for you, or would you like to hear from us more often? And then asking them to sort of help you fill out their profile. If there are data points that you don't have from them, you know, the preference center is a wonderful time to ask. So if you want to ask things that aren't readily available when they sign up to be a customer, this is a great time to get it. And I think we have an example. Or actually, we have an example in the next. Go back to the last slide, sorry. In order to create an effective preference center, there's just some basic nuts and bolts here. You want to make sure you are giving a universal unsubscribe option. That's not only sort of the legal way to do it and the right way to do it, but it's also just the way that the customers expect. They want to be able to get out of this email relationship with you, and they want you to make that as easy as possible. And the benefits of making that easy on them far outweigh the negatives of having people unsubscribe here and there. only offer what you can deliver. Don't put tentative email programs in your preference center. So if you're thinking about introducing a new newsletter for a certain audience next year, don't go ahead and try and build that list until you actually have it to offer, because what you'll want to do after they sign up for it is welcome them, like Bethany talked about earlier, and make sure that that experience from beginning to end or for the life of the program is as quality as it can be. You don't want to overwhelm them, so don't ask them to fill out their preference center too often. Sometimes that is something I see happen, where people are constantly nagging their audience for more information. Tell us more about you. You want to keep that as concise as it can be and as seldom as it can be, because really this is about you asking them for something, and you don't want to do that too often. You want to keep everything on one page to try and make the commitment of them actually filling out their preference center feel like it's an easy task and it's not going to take them all day. You want to ditch the default and really be on brand, meaning that don't pre-click a lot of options for them and let them truly choose. There might be some emails that they have to continue to get from you because they're a customer, and you can make that really clear. Like, we're going to still send you your invoice, or we're going to still send you these things. Would you like to get these other communications? And then the last is very obvious, but in today's world, making it mobile friendly. Mobile devices and rendering on mobile devices is obviously probably top of mind for all of you in all of your digital efforts. But you'll want to make sure that they can easily, because knowing that a lot of them are engaging with their emails on your phone, where you're going to be asking them to fill out their preference center, you want to make sure that that landing page in that area is effective on mobile as much as it is on the desktop. I think we have a couple of examples. Yeah. Here's a good example just of the unsubscribe at the bottom of both Questline's page and Litmus's page. And then you can manage your subscriptions right there from that same link. This is at the bottom of every email, and of, when we have sort of our preference center, we have those up there too. This next one is basically, it's saying it's 80% of your profile is complete. So this is a great one. I love this. It's sort of an interactive, very personalized approach that says, I have 80% of the data I need in order to give you a really, really unique and personalized experience based on what you are interested in. If you give me that extra 20%, this will be a much better experience for you. And same thing on this last one from Casper on the right. It gives you just lots of options and helps you understand that there are multiple ways to engage with the brand, and we're not going to overwhelm you without reason.
Without preference centers, you can't really do you can't personalize or segment communications very well. And maybe that's something I saw in the first survey that we did, or poll question, that segmentation is difficult, and having updated preference centers can really help with that and allow you to do more customized communications. So personalization is something that customers are expecting nowadays. Gone are the times of mass email messages. People want and expect content that fits their specific interests and needs. And not only is it just what the customer is asking for, doing this helps you reach your business goals too. So personalization drives performance and better outcomes overall. We've seen that actually 74% of customers are frustrated when they don't get information tailored to them. So they really are looking for stuff that hits on what they need. So if your engagement's low, maybe you try to segment and give people stuff that's talking specifically to their interests. A McKinsey study also shared that 71% of consumers expect companies to deliver personal interactions. So when you're not meeting customer expectations. We saw this last year work with AEP Ohio. They decided to begin segmenting their business communications, their C&I customer newsletters. So rather than a generalized newsletter with still helpful information, they decided to segment for healthcare audiences, manufacturing, whatever their largest segments were. And they saw an 84% increase in engagement with those customers when they started to deliver content that was really what they were asking for and really what they needed. So Low engagement metrics sometimes have to do with what content you're providing. While it may be quality, is it targeted to what they're actually looking for? When we think about personalization, I also think that utilities have a really unique opportunity there. So that personalization to me is including show monthly energy use or monthly bills and comparing that to people who are around them and locations and maybe what they were at last year or before they made an improvement or before they made a program or a step to get involved with the program. And you can include that data and show it personally right within an email. It's really going to improve that customer experience.
And I've already seen some questions on this topic, so I'm glad we brought it up. Many of you may have noticed, you can go ahead to the next slide, that Apple Mail, or Apple introduced the Apple, I'm looking over here so that I can make sure I get it right, the Mail Privacy Protection Act. And what that essentially does, and I'm going to read this out loud because it's very specific, it hides your IP address, so senders can't link to other online activity or determine your location, and it prevents senders from seeing if and when you've opened their email. So they announced this last summer, that started going into effect, I think, in late September, and we're starting to already see a lot of obvious adoption here. And what this means for the email marketing industry, and we've spent a lot of time talking about this over at Litmus, is that it's impacting your ability to see who has opened your email. It's impacting your ability to see time of open, any kind of geolocation that you're putting on that, and the type of device. So what does that mean? How do we react to that? Ultimately, there is a lot of talk in the email industry that opens was sort of a vanity metric to begin with, that it wasn't actually the thing that we were using to drive results. And so what we wanted to happen was, what's the goal of the actual email? Well, the goal was never for them to open it. The goal was for them to engage with it in some way. Even if that was just to read it, the opening of the email was not necessarily the critical piece. It was a leading indicator that was helping us understand what the rest of the audience was going to look like. So what we always tell people is to go back to what's the goal of the email. And if the goal is some version of click-through, then emphasize click-through as your ultimate goal, and understand that the open rate is not necessarily going to be, as important when you look at your metrics as you move forward. The other thing you can do, this is certainly not the entire email audience. So the rest of your audience can definitely serve as a proxy. What will happen to your overall open rate is that it will look inflated. So it'll look like everybody opened it. And, so we did a lot of education in September and October around, don't think that you're suddenly a rock star when your open rates go crazy up. But, what we're seeing happen now is it's really causing us as an industry in really smart ways to rethink what our KPIs are around emails themselves, and tie those to the actual business goals more so than just the opening of the email. But like I said, the rest of your audience can certainly serve as a proxy for the Apple audience. They're not, you can look at how that audience is engaging in order to A/B test the subject line, for instance, and use that as a proxy to sort of then send to the rest of the group. So expanding your metrics, what does that look like? There are many different ways to do this. There is email quality score. There's a little formula here that you can think about. There is unique clicks. There's account activity. So if what you're trying to do is drive somebody to your website or to their account, you can look at how much your email actually effectively did that. Or if you're looking at the website, you can check for that too. But again, rethinking how you think about A/B testing. A/B testing is one of our favorite things to do in email marketing, and it's typically just about putting one subject line head to head against another one. But A/B testing can also be incredibly impactful for email design and things like buttons and how your CTAs and even, content structure, content hierarchy, image placement, things like that. There are a lot of ways to A/B test an email that aren't just about the subject line.
Well, thank you, Cynthia. And I'm going to launch our third poll question for today. Which of the following email tactics do you currently use? Do you use segmentation? Are you using personalization? Are you using that automation and behavioral changes, or maybe it's other. So pick the one that best fits you. I see that many of you have input some questions, some great questions. We're going to get to those in just a minute, right after this poll is complete. So let us know which of the following email tactics that you currently use. Give us a good feel for where people are at in their email best practices. Looks like most of you who have answered, oh, I say it's more, still got some activity, so I'll wait just a second. Again, we appreciate you giving your input on the polls. Very helpful information to everyone. And I think it's settled down now. Let me push those results out. So segmentation, number one, by far, followed by personalization. So those are the main tactics that you're using right now. So with that, I'm going to start answering some of the questions from the audience. And let me pull those up. Here they come. One question is how do you optimize GIFs, animations, etc. for email users who have images turned off or platforms that block those type of things like Outlook?
Yeah, so my knowledge, Outlook has been updated to accept and display animations. And you can't really optimize it if people have that turned off. But a solution would be to use alt tags for those images and have different ways to display in case that is a problem. So it's focusing on the accessibility.
Okay. And another question here. There's again several questions about Apple's new privacy policy, and one question here is how can you truly test using A and B tests for subject lines with Apple's new privacy policy? Is that still possible or not?
Not with the Apple audience, but you can test. You can still A/B test subject lines with everyone else and use that to inform. So if you send to a small segment, usually A/B testing platforms or in your ESP are starting with 10% of the audience, say. So you would test for that group and then send the winner to the rest of the group. So ultimately what this means is that you just have to not test on Apple's audience and try it with the smaller segments.
All right, very good. I have a question here about, of course, mobile responsiveness has been a hot topic for years. And do we have numbers on what the device usage is currently? I mean, are we at 80% mobile, 60% mobile, and what percent desktop, et cetera? And I think Maureen dug up some latest numbers on that.
I know that last time I looked, we were almost half and half, and it's been at half and half for quite some time. But it might have gone up. What did Maureen's numbers say? Let's look.
55% of page views in 2021 come from mobile. So it's still right around half and half.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question here, I'm going to give this to Cynthia. Beyond open rate, what's the next go-to metric you'd suggest looking at if you were to choose one?
I mean, I think click rate is the most obvious that you want to sort of, and click rates, it's funny as email marketers, we have to sort of reset our expectations where we're used to open rates being in the 20 to 30%, sometimes as high as 40%, depending on the audience. And click rates are just very low. They're the percentages on those look more like 5% on a good day or 6%. And I think that just resetting sort of the way we think about it, that getting 5% of an audience of 30,000 to go to a place that you wanted them to go to is actually pretty good. So I think that click rate is the most obvious next thing that you would want to look for. And then the other is just like what exactly are you trying to get them to do? So if it's log into their account, I would go for that. It's not just whether they clicked, but I would say, like, did they do the thing once they got to the page, which again is also about your landing page strategy and some other things. But I'd start with the click for sure.
Good input, thank you. Over to you, Bethany. What deployment frequency do you suggest for sending newsletters to utility customers?
Newsletters, I think that monthly is best. People anticipate that. And I mean, I get some newsletters that are daily or weekly, and that's just really hard to fill with content. So I would expect the best option for utilities to be monthly.
Okay. And then kind of along the same lines, Bethany, another question. How many days gap would you put between welcome series emails so that we aren't overwhelming our customers' inbox?
That's a great consideration. We think that we've seen that once a week is usually the best because you can continue that communication for say a month, and it doesn't overwhelm them, and it gives them things to act on within week to week.
All right. Cynthia, you mentioned that we should collect customer data points to build customer segmentation, and you kind of mentioned location and purchases for us. So what other data points might a utility collect to build those customer segments?
To build the segments? Well, I mean,
Yeah.
you can get very specific on what kind of user they are, what kind of customer they are. I don't know what sorts of like buckets you would have in your world, but if there is a component in a certain area, yeah, geolocation is obviously a good one, but like businesses versus households, actual usage and creating some bucket categories for those is also just, I think it would be an interesting one to play with. I don't know, Bethany, if you have other ideas. You're closer to the industry than I am.
Yeah, we've been seeing a lot of conversation around EV segmentation, so electric vehicles, and just understanding where your audience is in that journey. And people who already have those vehicles definitely want different communication and advice than those who don't. And knowing if you have someone who's adverse to them, what stage are they in buying? Is it going to be within the next year, in the next 5 years? Or are they just not interested at all? And knowing that consumer behavior and sending different messages based on those journeys is something that we've seen major success with.
Okay. We talked about the major differences between 2019 and 2021 emails, and one of those differences, as you illustrated in the PowerPoint, was a vast change in vertical height. The 2021s are much more columnar, of course, separated. Are you at all concerned with the email getting so long, I guess is the question here. And what do we do about that?
I'm interested to hear Bethany's answer to that. I'm not. I think what we find is that an email, we used to talk a lot about the top of the fold in email marketing and making sure that, something that anything that's important sits sort of in the preview pane essentially, and that you'd be able to see it. I think that to me, what's more important is what's in the preview pane or what's top of the fold is actually engaging enough to make them want to scroll. Particularly on mobile, people will scroll all day long. Like they're happy to, it's not a big ask to get them to scroll down if the content is engaging enough. But Bethany, I don't know if you have a different opinion there.
No, I totally agree. And I think it has a lot to do with social media and how it's conditioned us to just like constantly be scrolling with our thumb. And we do it in our email too. And if you continue to have content that's interesting throughout, they're going to keep looking for things that are relevant to them. So while we don't want to overwhelm with like 20 different articles or something in a newsletter, that length, as long as it's easier to read and easy to engage with, length is not something that I'm worried about.
It was shared today that customers trust people over brands, and the question is, well, how does a utility best leverage their own brand in email marketing? I mean, are brands dead, or what can they do?
I don't think brands are dead, and I think that trust for utilities is still really, really important. So people trust their utilities most for information on, say, things like renewables or what's really happening with the grid today. They trust their utility for news and information. The trust for other consumers and peers really has to go with purchase decisions and large steps that people need to take. So I think that trust within brands is really what you stand for on a larger platform versus a particular product or a particular action. So we found that trust with renewables is really essential right now as some misinformation's out there.
Very good. And again, a very popular question, very real concern of everyone involved in marketing communication is, the question is, how do you avoid overloading readers with content? Is our guidance on, for instance, the number of articles or topics included in an email newsletter? Your feelings about that?
That's a good question. I think it's the ultimate question for all email marketers, whether you're in utilities or anywhere else. Understanding, I think that how much content are they actually interested in is the right answer there. So if you're really engaging them, and like Bethany said earlier, newsletters are having a massive comeback, partially from brands that are really trusted and from brands that actually have high engagement levels, and can, people are willing to engage with lots of different things that they have to say. So I think part of it is about not overloading them with content that's not relevant, or that's not interesting to them, which again is like it's a tough thing to put across the board for everybody. But Bethany, I don't know from this industry standpoint if you have any better guidelines than I do.
I totally agree with that, and I think that this is another opportunity for A/B testing. So you mentioned, Cynthia, like not just subject lines, looking at design and how you display your content. Test sending an email newsletter with 4 articles, and then test sending one with 6. Did anything happen to the 2 additional? Were they lower engaged with? What are you seeing when you actually test out that? And until you ask your customers and what they want, it's really hard to answer. So if you can try both and see what works best for your audience, I think that's the way to go.
Very good. Well, we've kind of come to the end, run out of time today, and if we haven't answered your question, we'll get to those offline. But right now, please answer our last poll for today, and while you're doing that, I'll finish of what was shared today. The last poll for today is, what topics do you hope we cover next year in our 2022 webinars? And we have 5 specific choices there. Some that's been mentioned today, some that we just been considering, but we'd like your input. So is it have to do with paperless billing, electrification, segmentation, emergency communications, or EVs, or maybe it's other. There, number 6, check that. We'll give you a chance to give your input if that's the case. Appreciate you, all of you, inputting on that. While you're doing that, I'm going to just kind of share what I heard today, some of the key points. I think I heard that we need to do more after the initial enrollment and sale, because customers really want improved after-sale experiences and services. We talked about including many stories of how other customers or businesses have implemented energy efficiency changes and their success. People hearing from each other. You guys challenged us to make more of our newsletters, maybe offer them more frequently, make them more tailored, and of course we heard that customer expectations are increasing in regard to segmentation and personalizations. I know Cynthia made a strong point about ensuring emails are accessible to all audiences, including Americans with Disabilities Act, but also all the different delivery platforms. And then finally, we are in some cases forced to expand engagement metrics beyond open rates. We heard some good discussion on that, some ideas, and we're also challenged to incorporate A to B testing as well. So let me share the results of our last poll. Pretty high interest in most of these, really, and I'll just leave it at that. So that's good input. I expect to see some of this content agenda and calendar for next year. I want to thank you, speakers, Bethany and Cynthia, for your excellent insights from your experience with digital customer communications. And I want to thank the audience as well for attending today and, of course, your great questions. Now, I just want to turn it over to Maureen. Let's hear some closing comments from her.
Thanks, Mike. And I would like to thank all of you for attending our webinar today. As a reminder, the presentation materials and the playback link to the recording of today's webinar will be emailed to you within the next couple of days. If you have any additional questions or feedback, though, please don't hesitate to contact us. Now, as we get ready for the holidays, this will be our final webinar of the year. We will not have one in December, but we look forward to continuing our webinar series with new thought leadership topics in 2022. If you do have a topic request, please feel free to email us at marketing@questline.com. And with that, I will finish off the webinar. So thank you again for attending, everyone, and have a great day.